Okay, so it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Sumana Annagiri. Sumana did her PhD from Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, and then after doing a postdoc at Tufts University, she joined IISER Kolkata, and she also happens to be my colleague there.
A glimpse of the world of ants, and one particular aspect of these ants' life, and totally looking at it from a biologist's point of view, an experimental biologist's point of view. I'm just telling this as a footnote because the homework that was given earlier, if I tried it for a year, I don't think I would have been able to solve it. This is really not what I would be able to do. But what I am fascinated with are living organisms and the decisions that they make live in a given situation that they're living in. So we'll be looking at decision making, but from a totally different perspective, that of living ants in different contexts, and we'll look at the outcomes of these decisions in the case of these ants. Okay, so I would like to start off by mentioning about movement, where we know that living organisms have these different abilities. Directed movement is an essential part of life itself. So organisms and suborganismal levels also, we're going to be seeing movements at the level of intracellular contexts, at the level of cells which is moving from one place to another, at the level of tissues, organs. Hopefully you've done this and have an idea of this. Organisms, right? The whole organism going from one place to another, and groups of organisms which are interbreeding in a given geographical location, moving into a different location, right? At the level of populations. So this is very essential to life itself. And of all of this bunch of different movements, there's one particular thing that I want to get your attention to this afternoon. And that is in the context of relocation. Relocation means going from one house or a dwelling into another dwelling, right? This is clearly directed movement. All these organisms have to go from one place to another. And that is what we will be looking at in detail in this afternoon. So given all the geoclimatic and political turmoil, I thought I'll put up something about humans and forced migrations that humans undertake, right? So are humans the only organisms that undertake this? Certainly not. Several biological organisms get through this process, and this forced migration, going from one dwelling into another, has direct implications on the survival of the organisms. All the investments and resources that have been stored in the dwelling gets into trouble. Fitness can be compromised because of this, because reproduction gets in the way, is compromised because of this movement. There is major disruption to activity, right? Because of all of these reasons, there is very strong selection pressure on the efficiency of this process of moving from one nest into another, or relocation itself, right? So evolution is going to be working on all the processes that make this efficient, make a relocation efficient. So time is one of such parameters. It is really essential when you're focusing on going from one place to another. And this is the parameter that we will be paying some attention to in today's afternoon's talk. Now, you may be wondering why we work with ants. And so I thought I'll get a slide with information about this. There are several species of ants, about 13,000 species of ants, which is actually higher than the number of species of mammals that are present in this world, or the number of birds that are present in this world, right? There's a lot more ants than them, and they're present in every part of the country, and they're found everywhere in great abundance. So one way to look at abundance is to look at their biomass, and it turns out that the biomass of ants is much more than all the wild mammals and wild birds put together, right? So they're really abundant. There's a great variety of them, and they're present pretty much everywhere in the globe. Of all of these ants, there's one species of ants that I work with. It's called Dacoma indicum. This is what the male looks like, and this is what the female looks like. It's found mostly in India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. They live in a colony, colonies ranging from the size of 12 to 261. Now, we start our study by typically collecting a colony from the wild, marking every individual ant with unique coats of paint. So this is a gold, blue, red ant, right? Otherwise, these ants look identical to each other, and you cannot figure out what is happening, who is doing what. So in order to understand that, we give individual identifications to these ants, keep them in colonies like this inside our laboratory, and ask questions about their lives. So this species of ant is of interest to us because this species is incapable of making trails. Most ants, like you would imagine, would make a trail to the food that you give them. But this species of ant cannot make a trail, and they will recruit their nestmates only when they're relocating. And the process of recruitment is by a behavior called tandem running. This individual here is a tandem leader. She knows the location of the new nest, and she will take this individual, a follower, in physical contact from the old nest to the new nest. All right? And if you want to see the tandem running video again, and if this is going to help. Yeah. So there is physical contact maintained between the follower ant and the leader ant, and she will take her to the new nest, drop her there, come back, recruit the second animal, go again. All right? So there are several decisions that these tandem leaders need to make, and we will be dwelling into these decisions. Quality of the new nest, distance to the new nest, when to move, and if there is traffic along the way, how can this be sorted out? All right, so these are some of the decisions that these leaders need to take, and that is what we will be looking at in this afternoon's talk. So where to move? We start with the simplest of the paradigms, and we set up a sand arena. This is the old nest, equidistant to two options, an optimal new nest and a suboptimal new nest. All right, and simply ask, what do the colony members that are here do? How do they figure out where to go among these two options? And like you can imagine, we cannot just look at one ant or one event that happens and understands it, but we have to rigorously look at it, and hence we have looked at 10 colonies, 1,263 transports, and the behavior of 147 leaders before we understand what is happening. All right, so what did we find in this simple paradigm? We find that not all leaders visit both the sites. Only 10% of the leaders actually visit both the sites. However, the ones that visit the dark nest, the optimal nest, quickly decide to start tandem running. All right, but the ones who are visiting the light nest, the nest which is suboptimal, will take double that amount of time to start tandem running to recruit to this nest. All right, and the percentage of animals who visited the dark nest and started recruiting is really, really high. Whereas the ones who visited the light nest and did not start relocating to it at all. So as a consequence of this difference, the decision of leaders to go to dark nests and quickly, the entire colony moves into the optimal nest, and because of this low latency. So remember, the colony cannot split into two options because all the individuals have to be cohesive, and there is only one reproductive. So the reproductive and all the members have to get into only one of the possible nests. So this scouts who visited the optimal nest decided to recruit nestmates with lower latency, and that led to the decision of occupying the dark nest, the optimal nest. The next question we asked is, what about distance to the new nest? Would ants be capable of assessing that there is a route which is shorter as compared to a route which is much longer, and can they take the shorter route? Right? that is the next question we asked. And in order to do this experiment, we came up with this maze where there is a short path, another short path which connects to the new nest. There's decision point 1 and decision point 2, where ants have to decide, the tandem leaders have to decide whether they'll take a right turn or a left turn. So if they take the left, they will be going on the long route, right? So this is the scenario, the old nest and the new nest, right? Now the answer is, will they take S, another S and reach here? Or will they take a combination of S and L and reach here? Or will they be taking L and reaching here? All right, that is the question that we asked. So if they are capable of assessing the shortest path, then of course they should be taking the shortest path, because that will take shorter time to reach. Now, what do we find in our experiments? Most of the leaders are taking a combination of these two paths, right? A combination of short and short long. Very few are sticking to only the long paths. And that is the same scenario with the number of transports that happen, right? Percentage of tandem runs that occurred across these 9 colonies by 77 leaders is, most of them are taking the SS path, right? The shortest path that connects the new nest to the old nest. This is what we see that the ants are doing. All right, now they certainly avoid the long paths. Yes, yes. They would explore, but they will start tandem running before they've explored all the 4 options. They will explore a subset and start tandem running, but at the end of the day, if you look at what happens for the relocation, we find that about 60% of all tandem runs have been conducted over the short path. All right? Yeah.
Since there is no pheromone in this case.
Yes.
So how do they keep track that this is the short?
Yes. Yes. So even if there was a pheromone, one can ask, how is it that they figure out that this is the short path? But in this particular case, there is no pheromone. So the leaders have to themselves in some way compute that this is the shorter path, and this will take lesser time in order to reach. Now, how would they be doing this? We have tried some different methods, for example, visual cues, and we know they're not using visual cues, right? There may be tactile cues involved, and we think that it is path integration that the ants are performing to figure out that this is the shortest path and take this. That is our hypothesis as of now, but we would have to test it. In the beginning, they're not exploring, they don't wait to explore all paths and then start the relocation. Along the way, they discover this, but once they get the short, they will stick to it, and most of them would be doing short. So the green fragment here is where leaders are doing only short, right? So they discovered this first and they're sticking to it.
So what is the reason of asymmetry?
Correct. So we would expect this to be comparable, all things being equal. However, we're seeing that there is an asymmetry. We don't know why this arises. So it could be the dynamics at the decision point. So if there's a large crowd in one direction as compared to another, and so forth, that may decide this. But that again is a speculation. Okay, so most of the transports were conducted on the shortest path, and the longest path was certainly avoided, right? So ants did not really take the long path to take their nestmates. So the next question is when to move. Yeah. Yes. Correct. So what happens is there are multiple tandem leaders are working at a given time, right? And there can be 3 tandem runs going parallelly. So that can lead to congestion at a given time. So tandem leaders first communicate the paths to each other and then start. Okay. Good question. So what happens in the beginning is about 10% of the colony are explorers or scouts. They get out of the nest as soon as there is a disturbance, and they will explore the arena. And a subset of them will start tandem running, right? Now, these tandem leaders will have other followers that go with them. Some of those followers will also become tandem leaders, and these are called secondary tandem leaders. These individuals learned about the new nest by following a different tandem run. So a combination of both of these occurs. Initially, independent exploration is what is important, but as the process goes on, secondary leaders emerge and they will do the transports. Yeah.
Can some tandem leaders also lead to the wrong nest or suboptimal nest?
Yes. There will be leaders who will take their followers into the suboptimal nest, but the chances that that follower will become a leader is already low. But if it is a suboptimal nest, then that chance is almost close to zero, right? Because the follower will assess that nest by herself, and if she finds that it is suboptimal, it is unlikely that she will become a transporter in her turn.
They come out of that.
Yes, they abandon that and continue to explore. Yeah.
But if that happens to be the queen?
Right. So most of this dynamics works in the beginning of the relocation, where new leaders are coming up. The queen is transported generally in the middle of a relocation, when the risks at the old nest and the new nest is similar. So if the queen is transported, she typically does not become a tandem leader, even though in 1 or 2 rare cases she has done tandem running. But typically she does not become a leader. Okay, to answer further, if I tie a queen down in a suboptimal nest, right, and so now bias that nest, will the animals get into this? We did this experiment and we find that it doesn't matter, they will not go to the suboptimal nest. Instead, they will work towards releasing the queen from whatever I have tied. 1 or 2 of them will hang out with her, but the colony does not move into it. They will go to the dark nest. Yeah. Okay, I heard something. Yeah. Yes. Yes. So, decision point 1, this is S and then L. This will be L and S. One more segment? Ah, you're saying if there was another one. Okay. Okay. As you can imagine, that's a lot more experimentation to do in order to answer that question. But the principle of this, why did we even come up with this kind of a maze, is because ants can have an intuitive bias towards left and right. So if there just was a common path connecting them, then just because ants had a right bias, maybe they would take one of those paths, which is the shorter path, right? So we want to avoid that. And that is why we came up with this, and adding one more such element to it will just make it more complex, but in principle will not give us any new information. Okay, but I would imagine that they will still take short. That is what I would bet on. Okay, so moving on, will tandem leaders require to understand when to move, how fast to get out of the place that they are staying? All right, so along these lines, there are several experiments we have done, but I would like to present only 2 of them in this case, and that is, if they have too much luggage, then tandem leaders decide not to relocate. So you can ask me, what do I mean by luggage? And luggage means the developing brood, right? Eggs, larvae, and pupa that are within the colony. So if they have to take this along with them from one place to another, then we find that when I increase the brood in the colony, add a lot of luggage, too much brood, tandem leaders do not move. So half the proportion of colonies do not relocate, right? Now, on the other hand, if we do the experiment in which we start putting water directly into the nest, then the situation is really bad. All their brood and adults are going to drown. And in such scenarios, ants will move out of there much faster than control colonies where they're not being flooded. All right, so the latency to move is decreased when there's a stress of water inside the nest. So these are ants which are adapting to the environment that they're present. They can sense how much luggage is there and what are the stressors that are present. Now, if we want to confound the movement with flooding as well as traffic along the way, what happens? Right? Now, I see that I have exactly 5 seconds remaining on my clock. Okay, I will take a few extra minutes to go through the second component of this, which is that ants, according to literature, do not get stuck in traffic jams. They make chemical trails and they're walking up and down in great numbers with great efficiency with no traffic jams. That is what literature suggests. But when we do experiments where we are looking at the context of relocation and through a bottleneck, we wanted to find out what happens. All right, so do ants face traffic jams? And this is the scenario where there's multiple lanes, many ants can go through. Whereas if we make a part of it into a single lane where only one ant can pass at any time, then can we see traffic jams? This is roughly how our setup looks like. We will have a camera in this area to record what is happening. So in this manner, we found out that actually ants do get stuck in traffic jams. If there is just one lane, then the number of traffic jams is significantly higher than when there are multiple lanes. All right, and who is causing these traffic jams? It is the returning leaders. Leaders who are coming back from the new nest to make new recruits are the ones who are causing the traffic jam as compared to the other possible candidates. All right, so what would a traffic jam in ants look like? Right, so let me show you this video where ants are passing through this narrow one ant lane. This is a tandem run coming through. Now they're stuck in a jam. In 1 second, they cannot move a single body unit. The jam will clear and all the ants will now go into the new nest, which is at this end. All right, so we studied 56 jam events to understand how these are solved and using behavioral observations to begin with, and then with the help of our collaborators looked at agent-based modeling to investigate what is going on in the ants' decision-making capacities, because behavior will only take us so far. So there is switching over. One of the follower over here is picked up by a new leader when there's a jam, and we thought that in one lane this thing happens more frequently, hence it could be a way of solving jams. Further, there is recruitment of lost followers along the jam. This increases significantly in one lane traffic, right? Ants that are lost, they don't know the way, those are recruited along this one single lane by new leaders. And a combination of these two events leads to unidirectional movements towards the nest, which is an emergent phenomena where all of them stuck in the jam will suddenly orient towards the new nest and move there. So almost every jam was resolved based on this emergent movement of the ants. Yes, yes. So I showed you that beginning, the tandem run itself was done on a twig, right? So when there is flooding, and monsoon is a very common part of where we live, then the nest that they're living in can be very often connected to a dry area through vegetation. And many parts of that vegetation is really just as narrow as what we have seen there. So we have observed this in nature and then designed the experiment to mimic what happens in the natural habitat. All right, so observationally, we can answer that midway recruitment and emergent unidirectional movement solves these traffic jams. However, there are many things that we will not be able to understand because we cannot ask the ants in the same language that we can do to humans. So we employed an alternate approach, which is to do an agent-based model where we mimic what happens in the jam. So there is the new nest on this end, the old nest on the other end, and ants are walking to and fro between these. Occasionally, a jam will be caused because of this narrow path, and in the model, they will also be resolved. The parameters that are required to build this model is grounded in the experiment that we conducted. All right. So we first did multi-lane simulations, the control experiment, so to speak, in the models, and saw that there's a complete match between the two. Then once this started working, we introduced the bottleneck in the agent-based modeling and compared the outcome with the experiment that we're doing. Now we have understood some part of it. We change certain specific input parameters and examine what is the underlying phenomena that is helping clear out these jams. So these are the sets of equations that are important, and one needs to understand if you want to rebuild this agent-based model, what is the rules at this one lane path, and what about interactions, how do they move per unit time, and so forth. All right, but I will move on from here to show you what are the results. Right? So I told you about switching over, and we find that switching over, if you change the probability of switching over and look at the number of jams that are occurring, you will find that this is not really very important. Right? No matter how much switching over is happening, it is not affecting the number of jams. The resolution times are also not being very greatly impacted with the experiment. And the transportation time, the total time taken to move the entire colony, is not really dependent on this switching over. Right? Hence we know from the model, because we cannot ask the ants directly, that switching over is not an important player in resolving these jams. However, recruiting lost followers is an important player. As the probability of recruiting lost followers increase in the model space, the number of jams that are occurring keeps reducing, all right, because of the manner in which this function operates. The resolution time, we could get a fairly good match. Black is in the experiment, and these are the different in the range of which we can have switching overs. And as you can see here, the probability of switching over, it has a relationship with transport time. Higher the chance of having the lost followers recruited, lower is the transportation time. So recruiting lost followers are important. And further, if you go at the level of the individual ant, then taking U-turns is extremely important. So returning leaders who are convinced that they have to go to the old nest have to change their mind and make a U-turn and head back to the new nest. This is extremely important. The time that they take to make this U-turn is positively correlated with the number of jams. The more delay they make in taking this decision to make a U-turn, higher are the number of jams, and so is the transportation time. All right. Further, the probability of making a U-turn and the time, both are critically important in how the ants would respond to a jam and solve it. So when you're stuck in a jam, returning leaders taking U-turns very quickly seems to be the answer for solving it. So bidirectional movement along restricted paths during recruitment to a new nest leads to traffic jams. For the first time, we're finding traffic jams in ants. And returning leaders' probability of making U-turns and the time they take to do it is extremely important. We tried other methods that the ants may be using, like traffic regulators or the workforce reduction, and we found that this is not operating in the system that we work with. So because of these adaptive decisions, it leads to an emergent unidirectional movement towards the new nest. So this is what we looked at this afternoon, but there are other contexts with these same nests and ants. So when thieves have to steal something and they're known to steal pupa, then their behavior is going to change, right? It's another context where we can look at decision making, because the life of this adult is at risk. And the gain is this pupa. So we could look at it as another context. And of course, the associative learning paradigms using this Y maze, where one of the arms can give you a reward and another, then this becomes another decision point, and we can understand how ants can solve these challenges that we threw at them. All right. Now, all of the challenges of doing the experiments and the modeling was taken up by my students. 4 of them are PhD students. He is an undergrad who did his master's with me, Joy is from IIT Kanpur, Sagar's student, and for the entire agent-based modeling, it is with them that we were able to delve a little deeper than at the level of the behavior in this process. So thanks to the effort of all of these folks, I was able to show you a little bit about ants. Of course, the money is something I need to talk about, and leave you with this thought that we need to re-understand, or at least try to get a glimpse into the life of ants. There are thousands of species. They make 2/3 of the biomass of all insects in our earth, right? Nobody hardly ever studies them. A person who studied it for 60 years said this about them. And I want to leave you with the thought that we could use ants to inquire into this tiny brain, right? Less than a millimeter in size. They face the same challenges, a lot of which echoes what humans do ourselves, and solve them. And we could look at the decisions they make and how they overcome these challenges. Thank you very much for your attention.
Jam, one has to distinguish between two things. One is spontaneous appearance of a jam, which in English you would say jam from nowhere. Germans say Stau aus nichts. And what we showed in that John et al. Paper that you mentioned, etc., these are that there is no spontaneous formation of jam. But even earlier we had shown that if you have a cable and there are bidirectional ones, jam can form. And the one that you had shown, actually because of the bidirectionality or constriction on the path, there can be jam. These are because of the defects that are sitting on the path. So that is different from Stau aus nichts. So one has to distinguish between the two.
Yes, I totally understand. And I really didn't go into the definition of the jam that we've used here. We used a very stringent definition of jam because we wanted to start this process in the context of relocation, because as I said, the stakes are much higher when you're relocating. So if you're foraging and just bringing food back from one place to another, then okay, if you're stuck in jam, it has one meaning to it, right? However, if your entire colony is at stake, then the selection forces would be much higher. So the definition we used is when ants cannot move for a single body length in 4 seconds, then we call it a jam. Right? And there should be animals who are stuck in this jam behind this animal who is not able to move. All right. Now, why did I pick 4 seconds? Because the entire distance of the narrow lane can be covered in 4 seconds. So we used a really stringent definition of jam. Now, if we relax that definition, there may be more jams possibly, but we want to understand it in the most stringent possible manner. And in this definition, by looking at the videos, we had 56 jams. So we looked at it from that data. Yeah. Yes.
Questions or 4 like events, if I say, they're not independent.
Yes.
For example, if we say there are optimal nests, but which is far from the
Yes.
nest, compared to there is a suboptimal,
Yes.
which is nearer with no jam, and there is a jam. So how then 4 things, I mean,
Yes.
how then decision making happens?
Correct. So it is not as simple as what we're projecting it to be, where only one stressor is present at any given time, right? There can be a combination of stressors. So like he suggested, if there is a good quality nest, but very far away, as compared to a poor quality nest, which is close by, then what is it that they will choose, right? Or there can be 2 nests which are identical quality, right? What is it that they choose? So both of these parameters we have studied in the lab. So I'll be happy to tell you what exactly happens. The answer is that they seem to take the poor quality nest which is closer to begin with. And after waiting for about a day, then they shift into the other one, when the distance becomes closer as well. So they seem to have very complicated responses when we combine these factors. But given the time constraint, I thought I'll start with the absolute simple paradigm so that I can make others understand who may or may not be very much from biology background. Yeah. Thank you.